Let's get started. Right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first Staffordshire Place Brand Creative Masterclass. Great to see so many people joining us this morning. I'm Christian Marcucci. I'm the Head of Communications at Staffordshire County Council, and for more than a year now, I've been working with Thinking Place, the UK's leading place marketing specialists, to craft a new story for Staffordshire and a confident, authentic and compelling new approach to promoting and marketing our great county. And this is a great county right in the heart of England with incredible landscapes and countryside. We've got world-leading attractions and global brands here. We're a world capital of ceramics. We've got thriving advanced manufacturing, science and tech businesses and an incredible tourism offer. We're in the centre of Manchester and Birmingham, just over an hour from London, with leading universities and outstanding business sites, incredible affordability and a great quality of life. We are the nationally valued centre of the UK, and we're dripping in assets as well. But for a variety of reasons, perceptions of this place don't match up, particularly when you compare Staffordshire to some of our neighbours and other parts of the UK as well. These are the perceptions that this work is trying to change, to showcase how much Staffordshire has to offer, and to grow a greater sense of pride in our place as well. Do that, and then we can start to raise the profile of the county and attract more investment, more business, more talent, more visitors. And this will help us create the right conditions for our economy to grow, to support existing businesses and organisations like the ones that you represent, and also to attract new ones, to create more jobs and opportunities for people here in Staffordshire. Now, this work began before the pandemic started, but it's clear that the events of the last year make this work more important now than ever. The new Staffordshire story and our place marketing approach have a big role to play in our economic recovery this year. And this important work, it's important to remind everybody, was commissioned and backed by place leaders from across the county, from Keele and Staffordshire universities, from the local enterprise partnership and Staffordshire's public sector. So there's a real team behind this work. And last spring and summer, Thinking Place came in and spoke to businesses big and small, spoke to tourist attractions, young people, community representatives. They ran focus groups and public workshops and spoke to people from across the West Midlands and beyond too. And they've turned those rich conversations into our new Staffordshire story, supported by a new visual language to help bring it to life. And we launched that story at the end of November, and in the coming months, we'll be rolling out our new approach. Just to give you a few examples, we've got a brand new role, a new place brand manager starting with us in a couple of weeks, who's going to be leading all of this work. She's going to be reporting into a place board made up of reps from across business, tourism, higher education and public sector, who are going to add their support and expertise and insight and act as the guardians of this new Staffordshire brand. And you should have all received invites as well to our first ambassador event on the 9th of February, part of a programme to bring together the passionate people who make Staffordshire so special, so that they can find out about the exciting developments happening across the county and act as our sales force, talking up the county at every opportunity. And there's going to be much more as well. I think it's really exciting stuff. And over the last year, I've been struck by how enthusiastic and supportive people, businesses and organisations in Staffordshire have been. And there's a real buzz and momentum behind this work now too, because we all have a part to play in sharing the Staffordshire story. We all have a stake in it, and we all have something to gain by making it fly. So this morning, you're going to hear from John Till, who's the founder and director of Thinking Place, and the creative director, Peter Anderson, who will showcase how you can tell compelling visual stories that are going to help promote the Staffordshire at the same time as promoting your own business or organisation. It's all about how you can be part of and at the heart of Staffordshire's story. I hope you enjoy this morning's session. You'll see on the Zoom this morning as well, there's a Q&A function for you to ask any questions as we go. Please note the chat's been disabled this morning, so use that Q&A button instead. But without further ado, I'll hand you over to John from Thinking Place.
Thanks, Christian. And it's great to be with you today, even if virtually. And well, Staffordshire has been a fantastic project, and it's been an absolute privilege to work with you guys. And it is, as Christy has said, a really, really great story to tell. I'm going to focus on some key elements that came from the engagement programme. It was probably one of the biggest engagement programmes there's been in Staffordshire, particularly with private sector colleagues. I want to share some of that and then really walk through the story, because the story drives everything, and you'll see when Peter talks through some examples how the power of that story can change everything from behaviours to public realm to the way we communicate. So I think one of the key elements to start with is this is very, very real in terms of the benefit of this. And Christian touched on some of this. At the moment, we're in a situation where economic growth, hanging on to the jobs we've got, let alone creating new ones, is absolutely at the top of the agenda. And if we're going to do that, to do it effectively means being place-led. And that's what we're expecting to be. That's what government is looking for. In some of the programs like Towns Fund, Future High Street Fund, is having a clear view of where the place is going, and not a council view, a shared view. So everybody has to be part of it. So this work is very, very relevant to that. And it's about making the most of what you've got. There isn't going to be huge investments. So what are the assets? What can you use? What story can you tell? How can you sweat those assets? And it's also about widening place leadership, getting more people prepared to put their head above the parapet and shout about Staffordshire, and to come together. And Christian's talked about the ambassador programme. I urge you to be part of that, because the coming together bit, the sharing things, will actually start to deliver change in the place. And it will deliver that very important thing called confidence. And we all need a bit of confidence at the moment. So when we look at what emerged from this engagement, and this is just a selection of some of the things that we took out of it as being really important. I think Christian used the words dripping with assets. I mean, you are so asset rich, it's unbelievable. From attractions to businesses, universities, urban centres, but boy, are you perception poor. And clearly that's why this piece of work's so important. You've got both second cities, and they both kind of claim it, at either end of the patch. And at times people have talked about that as being a problem. It's a massive opportunity, a massive opportunity. But people are thinking as well that they're part of somewhere else. And we'll come back to that. You know, the ones that are sort of at the south end relate to Birmingham, the north relate to Manchester. That isn't a problem. People talk about a lack of ambition and aspiration for the place as a whole. And certainly this work is there to try and address that. And whilst there are a lot of successes, they're not always celebrated. There are some very important strategic relationships here with the Midlands Engine, the Northern Powerhouse. We've talked about Birmingham, Manchester, but also London. How you look out to strengthen within is massively important. And you've got to do that with confidence. And I think this approach will help with that. And what a lifestyle opportunity Staffordshire has. You know, when people are looking to go to cities, but maybe not as much, and thinking about wide open spaces, green spaces, a place where they want to perhaps live and work, Staffordshire has a great, great chance to capitalise on that. But if you're going to do that, that needs the shared confidence, this new identity. And the university relationships are very important, not just the ones in Staffordshire, but the ones surrounding it. We've got a phrase there, pump up the value. That doesn't just mean about cost. That means the value that the place offers as a place of greenness, of openness, of amazing assets and attractions. You offer value that I think is just getting a bit lost along the way. So whilst there is a lot on offer, At times, you're kind of viewed as a bit of a second-rate destination. The visitor economy is a bit undervalued and under-resourced. You have actually a wonderful complementarity of towns. They're all a little bit different. Okay, there's some geography between some of them, but at the end of the day, they all offer something. But the problem is they're not coming together to form anything, and it's really important that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Along the way, perhaps the place has been a bit insular. It definitely needs to reach out much, much more. And that we have seen, I think, in the last 6 to 9 months. It's also not viewed as a place of dynamism and excitement. It's not been sort of seen as for young people. And clearly that has to change. And we have assets to help with that. And that last line is just a selection of some of the comments that we need to ditch. We don't want to be anonymous. We don't want to be nice. And we don't want an attitude of that'll do. So hopefully, again, the story will help change that. And when you look at Staffordshire and you strip back the place and you look at the geography, well, apart from the fact it is uniquely centrally located, fabulous green spaces. You've got the National Park and Cannock Chase, but a lot of other green as well, canal systems, countryside. But look at the surrounding cities, not just Manchester and Birmingham. Look at the ones there to the east and the south. Look at the connectivity. It's all fantastic. But the interesting thing is when you think about how the place behaves, and we've said that it has been a little bit insular. It's thought within itself. And what happens when that occurs is you diminish yourself in that. You diminish yourself, like the word Staffordshire is diminished here. Everything becomes less. You become defensive, not confident. It's really, really important as a place that you are big, bold, confident, and in your discussions with the cities, with the universities that surround you, you go into those conversations thinking, we have got a story to tell. We've got something to offer. We've got things to add to what you've got. And that's what this is all about. So if we look at the story is made up of a number of themes, and the themes really about what you need to focus on if you're going to change image, drive transformation, grow the economy. So they are your differentiation, they're strategic, they're absolutely not strap lines. So we're not necessarily suggesting you're going to see these everywhere. But they are really, really important in terms of how you communicate and develop that experience. So I'm going to show you some of the evidence that supports each theme. I'm not going to go through all of it because there's lots, right? But when you start to look at the place here, you see a place of greenness, of different landscapes, a place that's great for the outdoors. You can have fun. There's lots and lots of activities. Look at that right-hand column there of different places and experiences that you could do with families or by yourself. It's fantastic. There's lots of it. I mean, it wouldn't be wrong to say that Staffordshire was effectively attraction central in terms of what it's got. And also what it's got, and we've touched on it, is so important now. The opportunity for active lifestyles, for health and well-being, and how important has that been? Space to breathe, openness, the chance to get outside, and whether it's walking or mountain biking, doesn't matter. But these assets, when you put them together, change how you look, and they change who you can attract. And we've talked about this theme as active, adventurous, and fun. And those words are everything that the stakeholders were perhaps saying it isn't perceived as. And therefore, that youthfulness of experience is really important. So the second theme is kind of unashamedly around business. It's about innovation, and it's about the economy. And this is a place with some big brands and some big businesses, but also a lot of insight and innovation, which has been part of your history and your heritage. And that history needs to inspire a whole new tranche of innovation, a whole new tranche of SMEs and startups linked to the universities, linked to the knowledge economy, linked to technology, because that's where the future lies. That's what you can offer in some of your urban centres. That's what you can offer when you really make use of what the universities are doing. And it's some really powerful stuff, whether it's gaming or whether it's IT, there's an awful lot happening. And the important bit is that you can compete with the big cities in this new world, because people, as I say, want to be working in a more of a lifestyle environment. So it's great you can get to Manchester, Birmingham, London, but isn't it also great that we can meet people for a coffee in one of the towns? Isn't it great that we can do a bit of work from home or enjoy some shared workspace? So we've talked about this theme as inspiring and applying ingenuity. And that's that application. So the use of the universities, this isn't just academia, this is about applied knowledge, working to create new businesses. So the third thing picks up something we've talked about that's strong, which is that lifestyle, that countryside. We haven't even touched on food and drink. This workplace ecosystem in a place with wonderful history, heritage, real texture of place that you don't find everywhere. So here, we've got different places to live. We've got a place that's very well connected. We've got the city at the heart of it. We've got landscapes for living. We've got a lovely urban, rural mix. And it's very important that this landscape that we are blessed with is looked after, because it's going to be so important now, important for the visitor economy, but important as a place to live and important as being at the heart of a business offer. So cherishing our natural livability is really, really important. And sitting above those is a big idea. And the big idea, right, is all about a more sort of emotive, strategic signature for the place, a statement of intent, less to do with differentiation, more to do with how we think about ourselves. And some of the things that we've talked about are here as the evidence. What we worry, people talked about, we're in between, we're kind of lost between Birmingham and Manchester. Well, that needs to become, we're the heart of, we're adding value to. And look at the things on this slide: World Capital of Ceramics, National Forest, National Football Centre, some real big things. And this is about moving from complacency to confidence. It's about reaching out to strengthen within. It is about a place that is affably affordable, really friendly, but great value. And look, we've got some more nationals here: the National Brewery Centre, the National Park, the National Memorial Arboretum. How many national places do you want, guys? So a wonderfully centered place, which is kind of like the hub that holds things together with a fantastic set of assets. And we've talked about that as Staffordshire nationally valued centre. So that's picking up a whole host of things. Nationally, confidence, celebration, amazing assets, the wonderful value of the place from, yes, cost, but more importantly, value in terms of assets and what it offers. And centre, yes, we're at the heart of the place, but we want to feel like the centre. We want to feel confident. We want to feel like we're adding value to others. So you end up with a story that looks like that. 3 themes, big idea, all about distinctiveness, all about changing behaviours. And some criticality with this. First of all, this is not a project. It's a long-term strategy. It's about bending strategies and plans to support it. As Christian has said, there's going to be a place board there. So that's about widening leadership, being place-led. The ambassadors create this wonderful, passionate Staffordshire sales force. We're going to have independent place manager, is coming in to give us that management, that coordination, that drive. We're going to have collateral and events. But most of all, it's going to be about the place doing things differently, being bold, taking risks. And that is not just the council, that is everybody. Fantastic story. I urge you to get involved. Please come to the ambassador program. If you've got any questions, just a reminder, put them on the Q&A facility. And at this point, I hand over with pleasure to Peter Anderson.
That was smoother than I thought it would be. Hi, I'm Peter Anderson. I'm Creative Director of Thinking Place and Director of Peter Anderson Studio. This is a particularly interesting and important project to me. There's a slight bias here because my mother is from Stoke-on-Trent. So this shows some of the things that we do in terms of place. We've been working as a specialist company for over 15 years. We've worked in all scales, from development to village to town to city to county to country. And we continue to do so and love what we do. With my other hat on, work in television and bring stories to life that again are very specific and targeted stories to very specific audiences. And that's where the crossover very comfortably fits with place. So in terms of some of those place examples, here's a couple. So Northern Ireland, the country with its absolute massive communications. So not only did we create the strategic story, but we also were in charge of bringing that story to life in its multitude of ways. And that's very helpful in terms of understanding what an engine can do and where it's useful. Another example, which is currently flourishing, this is Zambia. I was in a meeting only yesterday talking about a major sculpture project using local craftspeople to effectively generate a new interest in local tourism and international tourism for the place. And cities like Lancaster and the multitude of events and communications that it needs to do in terms of pushing itself out there and competing with other cities. Right down to places like Malden, little towns that have a lot to offer, but often aren't heard of. And again, from their story, influencing things that go right through to things like their environment, their signage and other elements. To event brands, this is working with Heritage Open Days, a sub-brand of that, which is effectively about catching oral history as part of a process of not only capturing what's special about a place, but holding it in time. To then film. And film, again, as I talk about, this is Mandela, major Hollywood film, but the important thing here isn't necessarily talking about what the projects are. It's about recognizing that with film and television, when you have a story, you need a visual language that suits that story and understands the audience that story is attracting to. So The Hustle, on one hand, is a mainstream Hollywood film that needs a certain approach, which is very different from an art house film like Ai Weiwei's Human Flow. This continues with a multitude of expression within television. Each show or each story is very much targeted and very much has its own look and feeling. So something that you're doing for something historical will have a historical feel, will communicate in a certain way that's very different from a modern drama and will need very different tools for it to be successful. So with something like Sherlock, we don't only create the brand title sequence, we also create the visual language, how it communicates. So this notion of when people communicate using technology, it's taking these elements into the TV program. So what's important here and why we're here is about telling the Staffordshire story. It's about looking at that engine and deciding how we can use, I guess, the research, because it goes back to the research and what everybody said from the place. And we have gone through a process of distilling that research into themes that are effectively your engine. And then it's how do we dissipate that out the other side? And that's why we're here today. So the first thing that you think about is photography when you think about communication. That's the obvious thing. Most people think, well, photography is just something you do. You go out, you send a photographer out, it might be a local one, you photograph maybe your town centre, maybe your local church, and then you show that. That's not how it should operate. It should operate strategically, and it should be one of your tools in which you show off very, very simply, but also in a way that's very accessible, your story. So to give you an example, Holy Island, what was very important about Holy Island in Wales was its Celtic roots, its topology, its land, but it also, in terms of its story, had a connection to Druids, to spiritualism, to those types of things that were very much about its history. So what that meant is when we commissioned the photography in terms of expressing this strategic story, we took that into account. So we said to the photographer, we want you to emphasize this spiritualism, the kind of the magic that's there, which simply meant the photography where it could was taken into the sun. And that brought that story to life a little bit. Another one of the things that was very important in terms of its story was that the land was bigger than the people. And very simply, as you can see, the land is bigger than the people. But each story is different. So the way you think about that story should be communicated differently. So in the case of Coventry, innovation, technology, enterprise and learning was what made that city special. So that meant was you didn't go and photograph the land, you found out where that innovation was happening and you brought that story to life. So this is inside Jaguar Land Rover. This is showing that innovation. So quietly on a website, it's saying quite a lot, even without words. And again, this is within one of the universities, showing that education and learning with its communications. Also, this can be simpler in terms of the communication. Aldershot was very much about transforming and repositioning itself from somewhere that was army to somewhere that was about being family first. Again, a simple solution here. That's taking those army bases, taking those facilities and repositioning them to tell that family first story. So that's putting the families and the young people in those places that make Aldershot special. And again, that's simply a case of, who's in these photographs? Family first is your strategic engine. Therefore, family is in your photography. So with Staffordshire, there's more to it. It's a county. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot to communicate. So you need a lot of photography. With that photography, you need to communicate your themes, your active, your adventurous and fun theme. Also, your inspiring and implying ingenuity theme. And then also within that, the cherishing the natural livability. And at the heart of that, you're also where you can capturing and illustrating and bringing to life that Staffordshire is naturally valued centre. It's incredibly important to always think about how are these elements applied, because they're purposely not strap lines, they're engine focus points. So that means when you're applying the photography, you're looking at that ingenuity, you're seeking out those stakeholders and you're showing off what's going on within the county in terms of the different businesses and that applied ingenuity. It also means that you're showing and showing off your active, adventurous lifestyle. You're showing that no matter where you are, no matter at what level you engage, you've got it all on offer, And again, You know, there are many ways of doing that. You know, ingenuity in business can also be in retail. You know, this is a fabulous place. It's just, you know, an independent shop that's doing things differently. And again, those sorts of things are as important as some of the technology that's happening. But of course, your history and heritage in terms of clay, in terms of your big Stoke-on-Trent story, well, it isn't just a Stoke-on-Trent story, it's a Staffordshire story. And what's important here is also, it's not only taking where the roots come from, you know, with the pottery and how that's been an international phenomena, but also reminding people that that ingenuity is a continuum. It moves forward, and that's incredibly important. So of course you show off and you celebrate your brands, but you look at that ingenuity as well that's going on, because that's a continuum. And again, of course, you've got fabulous brands to shout about. But also in terms of the livability, there's oodles of it. It doesn't stop. And whether that's eating out, and also being able to represent that in a way which purposely here is more abstract. So therefore, anyone can use it from the county. So you can be specific in terms of your place, but you can also focus in terms of some of your product. And some of the places just speak for themselves in terms of livability and lifestyle. So also, you know, there's a like, as I say, a mass of places and a mass of opportunities. So your photography in a way is a never-ending project. And whether it be your theatres, whether it be how you've repositioned and reused some of your historical assets, it's things to shout about. But also innovation happens in the rural sector as well. This is one of your examples of rural innovation and one of your important rural stakeholders. And of course, we can't forget the national story and being nationally centered. You know, these are just some of the examples of some of the photography we've started in terms of this process of illustrating and bringing to life Staffordshire's strategic story. And this is just one of many of Staffordshire's national assets, the National Arboretum. So, moving on, because I know how painful Zooms can be, and I know my eyes bleed at the end of the day. I'd certainly rather be in a room with you all. What is a visual language? This is another one of the tools that comes from or is part of the process of helping bring your strategic story to life. And it's simply doing a job which is supporting strategy, as is the photography, probably the most important thing. So a visual language is a way of telling your story. It's a glue that holds together everything in terms of your communication. It's designed to work in a way where all stakeholders, as in all you businesses out there, can use it. It's not designed to compete. It's not a logo against the logo. It's about giving you something where you can say, our brand comes first, our communications come first, our colors come first, our messages come first, but actually we want to connect with our county. We believe that the sum of all parts is greater than the individual. So it's a way of actually capitalizing on your assets in a way that's quite soft. So it's there and can be used like a watermark, or it can be used in a more illustrative way that's more effectively front-facing. So a visual expression, why use this visual expression and why use a visual language? So this is just a simple example in terms of what it can do. This is a town, Chesterfield, and with Chesterfield, there was nothing wrong with Chesterfield. It simply needed a modern awakening. You know, and if anybody thinks of Chesterfield, you can't escape the twisted spire. It's an icon, almost like Paris is an icon. I mean, sorry, almost like the Eiffel Tower is an icon for Paris. With Chesterfield, you type in Chesterfield, you'll get 1,000 twisted spire logos. You can't get away from it. People are incredibly proud of it. And they're proud of it because of what it represents. It represents their inventiveness. It represents their sort of weirdness when you look into their history. So people are incredibly proud of this. So in terms of expressing what it's about, with the modern awakening in mind, a sensible thing to do would be take their icon that everybody is proud on and their heritage and doesn't want to move away from, and I guess remix that or reinterpret that looking forward. So it's illustrating the theme, that theme being a modern awakening. So to do that, you can effectively push as far as this. You can push in a way that is putting it into 3D, making it into a CGI representation. So effectively giving it a modern awakening, but being respectful for where it's come from. That's kind of as far as an identity can go. It can't really go any further than that. The minute you take it into a visual language, you can take those elements, the actual detailing that makes the Twisted Spire special in terms of its slatting and its architecture and its construction and its slight kookiness. And you can use that as a symbol, a metaphoric symbol for being a modern awakening. So fundamentally, you can take the ingredients from the past and resculpt them to make new ingredients and new stories, which of course is very relevant to your story. So effectively, your language is then used symbolically rather than literally. And then once you have a visual language, you can apply it. So you can apply it in very practical ways. So it comes from somewhere. It's not just a random bit of mark making. It's something that's designed to help your storytelling. And you can use it with partners. So here on the right-hand side, you can see a local developer has its own logos. And you can see there's a bit of a logo fest on the left. It has its own colors, its own typeface. And the visual language is almost like a quiet watermark that's going through it. So it's not competing with that individual stakeholder in that business. It's adding another complementary element. And then on the left-hand side, that visual language and that system can be applied more directly and with a more of a succinct design sense. So in terms of your visual language and what we need to think about in terms of when we're expressing the Staffordshire story, you know, we're going back to those themes. We're going back to the fun elements, your Alton Towers. We're going back to the active elements in terms of your national park. We're going back to the notion of inspiration, you know, so that means it's not just about ceramics as it was. That's about ceramics as it's pushing forward, you know, and Staffordshire are doing incredible things, you know, not only using ceramics in new ways, but using ways that are leading the world, you know, in terms of some of the things they're doing in terms of medical construction and other elements. But also in terms of this visual language, there's a lot going on. There's a lot that needs to happen with a county. And you need something that's flexible to be able to tell some of your stronger stories, but also to be able to focus in on individual stories and communications. And we can't get away from the fact of your positioning, your attraction central, your national football, your national park, your national capital, your national brewery, you know, the list carries on. You know, so you're actually demonstrating these themes and this big idea. And again, we apply another layer of words to this, which are creative strategic direction words. And these words are effectively visualizing words. These are words that should remind us when we commission photography, when we commission anything to do with the public realm, when we think about our communications, helping words. So, you know, we should be thinking green, we should be thinking natural. You know, but also within that, we should be thinking about reaching out and the flexibility of that, of being forward looking. You know, we're polycentric. We've got lots of elements, but also we want to connect those polycentric elements. But, you know, we have our heritage, but we're also thinking about how we move that forward. So as I say, It's in terms of your expression, you need something that bends and flex and moves and takes your heritage forward. So in terms of your expression, all that comes into play. So you have a Staffordshire, which in itself, with its typography, is rounded, it's centered, it's friendly, but it's taking on board those qualities. We're taking your heritage and a heritage with the Staffordshire knot, but reinventing that to tell that story about being centered and effectively celebrating that. But then that needs to be flexible within that, because you have themes within that. You have this notion of your natural assets, which effectively connect with your livability, your technology, and moving things forward. And again, those naturally centered assets, as you can see here illustrated. This language is about flexibility, change, and something which puts at heart your centered big idea, but within that allows for a multitude of expression and a language which effectively is quietly putting that forward, as opposed to in your face within a logo or identity. So as I say, whether you're communicating to the hard edge business inward investment, your expression can change for that. And again, within that language, there's some of the elements from your car industries, or whether it's talking about livability, but it's doing it in a confident way, in a way which effectively shows you're looking forward as opposed to backwards. And again, you know, this allows you a system where you can use your visual language in a micro state when you're talking about micro stories. You know, this might be talking about your national park and hiking and mountain biking and other elements, but it's doing it within a centered expression, as is here, as is here. So the continuation of this, but also you might be celebrating, it might be fireworks night, or it might be another event, it might be a festival. And your visual language has to be able to flex to do that, to allow you the freedom. And this is what it's doing, but it's always reminding about this interweaving, about this centered story, no matter what it's talking about in terms of the individual stories. As I say, whether they be pottery, whether they be technology, and how that's used. So you might be, when you're expressing yourself, you put your visual language up front with strength, and celebrate the different individual stories that you need to celebrate. So again, these are more examples of that, where that can be applied. And this is just showing it working, really, in its multitude of brands and its multitude of ways. So as you can see, the list goes on and on and on, which is fantastic. And as I say as well, you can be very, very focused in terms of how you either push forward or sit back with that expression. And whether you're just using a photograph and applying your visual language simply as a soft watermark. Also, importantly, when you think about your partners, you've got to think your partners can use it, and you can see on the top right-hand side in full color, but very quietly, or it can use the expression like a quiet watermark, which you can see here in the bottom of the screen. So that flexibility is incredibly important. And again, here, very, very quietly and softly. So you have an identity. Your identity also flexes, as you can see with these different expressions. You have a typeface, and it brings us back to our themes and our big idea. So every moment that I can in terms of this session, I want to remind you all about how this can be applied, and where as stakeholders you can apply these aspects. Where can you apply this important engine of being naturally valued center? Where and how, and in what? In communications, in products, in behavior, in your environment. How can this be applied? Also, how can you apply the theme active, adventurous, and fun? Again, how do you apply inspiring and applying ingenuity? Also, cherishing our natural livability. I'm kind of settling on this a little bit before we go to the next part, because I want you to think about where it's useful and how it can come to life. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about other examples. So in a way, I don't want you to look at the other examples. I want you to look at the other examples really thinking about your story and how your story is relevant to these other examples and how you apply your story. What things can you take from what other places have done with their stories, and how can you bring those forward? So like I said, it's all about taking that place story and applying it to the different sectors. So who can tell your story? Well, there's a multitude of people who can tell your story. It might just simply be the community. This was an exercise that we did with Hull, which was simply taking the strategic story to school kids. This was simply at the beginning of this exercise, we asked school kids, how many of you intend to stay in Hull? Almost none of the kids put their hands up. We did a simple exercise which effectively showed them some of their assets, talked about their strategic story moving forward, obviously in a community-friendly way, and simply asked at the end of the workshop, how many of you kids intend to stay here? 3/4 of the room put their hand up. Your story is as powerful as that. And it's not, we all forget what we have when it's close to us. And there are more fun ways of applying it too. This was in Castleford, and this was taking the thoughts and the elements and the stories that people said, and this was simply using colour paper and a photocopier and telling the people's thoughts and aspects of their place and wrapping it around the town. So people's words, they didn't feel like they were taken and they were pushed into a corner to be forgotten. They were actually replanted so they could see that their thoughts and words meant something and created change. And in this case, we worked with Channel 4 and we went in with a television company and filmed their reactions. So it became part of a bigger process. But also, again, you can take those assets. You can see you've got a visual language. You can see you've got photography. This is something that's applied only last month in New Haven. And this was about getting local pride and local passion back up. And this was about celebrating some of those assets, celebrating some of those skills, but actually doing that locally. So in terms of example here, in terms of Coventry, this is quite an important example. This is, we're very proud to say, recently City of Culture, and it's followed all the way through. Looking at its story here. So looking at this notion that it's a beacon for moving on and moving up. Its themes were about connection, Warwickshire, Birmingham, London, innovation, technology, enterprise, and learning. This is where there's some crossover with you guys. It also had an important theme of peace and reconciliation. But at its heart, it was about being event central. It was about changing the way it behaved to events. So what that meant in its case was that it focused on those events. So again, this was an event focused in and hosted by Jaguar Land Rover. And the stakeholder became one of the advocates for the place. And the place got together with the stakeholders in celebrating these achievements and these events. They also went forward to take their story to the investors in London. So very pragmatically saying, we know where the money is, let's bring the money to our place. So they held this event in the Shard and said, come on, look at our innovation, look at our enterprise, and bring your money and your investment and your jobs and opportunities to our place. But again, in terms of their storytelling, peace and reconciliation was incredibly important. So all underneath the umbrella of Event Central, these new events are redefining the city. And in terms of one of their themes, peace and reconciliation, they created a new peace and reconciliation event, a global event that had global leaders as part of that. So their ambition to bring the themes to life was absolutely outstanding. And You know, your opportunity to do that is equal. But also, there's smaller scale things that happen when stakeholders get together, when people who love their place get together. Small but wonderful things can happen. So this was simply in one of the champions meetings. Somebody was moaning about the ring road being a negative in Coventry, but somebody else was a car enthusiast and said, why don't we turn this negative into a positive? So they created a car event where they used the assets and also celebrated Coventry's heritage of cars and its inventiveness of cars. So also was taking a few of these themes really and bringing them together, but that happened in a room. That happened somebody from the council working with the private sector, making things happen. And I think it's an incredible thing. And of course, you know, the big stuff, UK City of Culture, you know, that process isn't necessarily by a story, it's about a story being used to bring the players together, the people together who care. And when people come together, they can lobby the government, they can get money from the government, which gives opportunities moving forward. Another example in terms of bringing stories to life, which is very different, but again, connected to you in terms of your assets, in terms of your natural livability, is South Downs National Park. We were very privileged to win the best place brand or best international place brand for this project. And that's about the practical application of taking a strategic story and applying it and bringing it to life. So in its case, it's about conserving and communicating a cultivated experience. It's not a national park that's rugged. It's a national park that's rounded. You know, it's got rounded hills. It's very soft. It's got a human by nature experience. It's connecting some of those experiences, but it's also very important to be a living landscape. So in terms of its expression and the application of its expression, in terms of, and with you, that natural livability, and with your national park is something where you connect here. So it's me in visual language connected those stories and assets, but did it house within its rolling hills. But it took those stories, whether they be its chalk basin and how that chalk basin affected its natural assets, its grasslands, its heathlands, its woodlands, and how then those woodlands created an effect in terms of its unique wildlife. You know, so you have butterflies that only exist there because of the topology that exists there. But then this also influences things like literature and the human by nature element of this. So you take that story and you have a visual language and you have a set of photography, and you can apply it in a multitude of ways for free. You've got these assets, you've got photography, you've got a visual language, you've got assets what you can apply, whether they be to some of your centres, whether they to be your communications, your newspapers, whether that be to your signage, whether that, and that can be done in a sculptural way, or that can be done in a very minimalistic and practical way, as you can see here. But again, a multitude of ways and simply accessible, whether some of your local stakeholders, like you can see here with Best Bidder, want to take that pride forward, that can happen, you know, whether they're applied to vehicles. But again, what's important here isn't the application of the visual language, it's actually the communication of the message. The important thing here is the 100% electric, that the national park is behaving in a way where the theme human by nature is being brought to life, but that is also fed back into people's behavior. Whether you use it in uniforms, whether you use it in your advertising campaigns. And again, you've got the assets. Here, this is about people taking responsibility, stopping using public transport, and effectively, or using public transport to get out of cars and stop effectively polluting their environment. And the assets are there. So this is a very affordable process. But again, with the things like their website, This is about constantly reminding yourselves, if we have a strategic story, if we've all agreed, which we have, that all these assets are things that we should talk about because these are the things that make us special, then we need to apply that. So something that was important to the South Downs story was the fact that it was uniting over 200 square miles of geography, the assets and stories that went with that. So quite simply, when we did a workshop with them, with their website, there was that reminder of, hold on, guys, at the start of the process, you were saying, hold on, we can have weather, we can have a widget, we can have events, we can have all these things. And the people from the South Downs were arguing about what went first, how did it work? But very simply, it was about reminding them, you need to go back to your strategic story. And one of the things that was very important was uniting this 200 square miles of geography. So simply that meant on the first page of their website, that's what you did. You applied that thinking. So you united it with your assets put together in one format. So a viewer saw that as one asset and therefore as one place. The list go on in terms of application. It just keeps going and going. But again, something that's very important is, you know, you think of the National Trust, you think of the brand police, you think they're an organization that are very tough about their brand and not particularly interested in individual places. This is absolutely far from the truth. They just need assets and people to work with. They're a wonderful organization that embraces different places. So in effect here, this is a classic example of them embracing the South Downs National Park. This is one of their centers, but they're applying the visual language and connecting it to their very, very, very strong brand. But they're applying it because it's a visual language and because its logo isn't competing with the National Trust logo. And that's the same with all you stakeholders. And again, like I say, your expression can move and move and move depending as your story moves. So they were granted dark sky status in 2019. Therefore, their visual language moved with that new story and celebrated it. So in terms of ambition, ambition isn't about scale. This isn't about you can only do it if you're a county. You can only do it if you're a city. This is about people getting together. So I thought this example was very helpful because of, in a way, its size and the fact that it's pretty small. This is North Notts. And its visual language was reflecting its rural story and its space. So therefore, its design and its expression quietly illustrated its story. And whether you do that with bunting, whether you do that in terms of they applied this poster themselves, in terms of the local airport, it's where your opportunities lie. But also, you know, one of the aspects of their story was bringing their rurality into their town centres. So this was about having allotments in your town centres with your environment, your product. So you don't just have a bench, you have a bench that celebrates your assets and brings the countryside into the town centre. And in terms of bringing its stories to life, Robin Hood is one of its important stories. So you can see here, its finger posts were reflecting and bringing to life the Robin Hood story, but doing it in a modern way as opposed to a passive backward way. So you're also celebrating your skills and your local craftsmanship. What's important here, as you can see, is that within this place, each town could have its own identity within that. So each town had its own color, even though you're united by an expression and you're united by a visual language. It's important that those individual elements of place are kept and locality and localism is still celebrated. So you can see Worksop is a certain color and effectively some of the other towns are different colors. And, you know, and what's important here is that can be applied very, very, very cheaply. So you've got on one hand, a massive bus station here, and this was their new future looking bus station. But on the other hand, you know, if you look to the left, you've got an old sign that just by giving a lick of paint is given it a bit more of place individuality, and is celebrated a bit more. So, and you can do that in things as boring as your parking signs. You know, by giving them place uniqueness, just lifts what they do. And you can be playful in terms of that storytelling. What's nice here is this was a project paid for by Virgin Rail, not paid for by the place, not paid for by the council. Virgin Rail got together with a historic society, got the assets from the local council, as you have these assets, and did this themselves. They had a particular interest in the history of the place, and they effectively used the tools to apply, whether it be on their benches, whether it be in this kind of dark, murky tunnel under the railway. But as I said, they engage with their local stakeholders. And in this case, that was Virgin Rail. Incredible. Also, reminding themselves, the council had dedicated meeting rooms to each of the elements and each of the story themes to remind itself how it was applying those themes when it was thinking about itself as a place champion. And its behavior changed. You know, one of the most exciting things here isn't the application of a visual language, it's the fact that they took one of their themes and they did something about it. This museum didn't exist before the strategic story existed. This was an output of celebrating their stories, their pilgrim story being incredibly important to them. So the actual place changed. Some of the assets of that place changed because of that story. And they're continuing to be ambitious about that. They're in the process of thinking, how can we make the biggest rural sculpture in Britain to effectively make us a center point, to bring focus to us? Why even have signage? Why not think with this ambition? And that ambition by a small group of people meant that they were voted to be effectively one of the UK's, first rural bids. And effectively that meant they got millions of pounds for the government for their place. So we got to go back to Staffordshire, because this is why we're here, and think about all the ways that we can apply Staffordshire's story. So the purpose of this workshop is about taking these examples, taking the thinking, but going back and focusing on Staffordshire. So you'll be given a toolkit, and these are the contents of your toolkit. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to go through those in detail now, but what's actually helpful is to know that that's there. You can access this, and you can access the tools that come with this. You know, it talks about the strategic story. It introduces you to these aspects. It also explains how the visual expression works, how your visual language and its forms come to life, and also how that can be applied in a multitude of ways, including the white visual language. So that's incredibly useful. So you can see here that there's a multitude of different aspects going on in terms of using and applying the visual language. So you have a color palette, and that color palette is of course flexible. There's certain colors you need to use at Christmas. There's other colors you might need to use in summertime. And also there's a window system, which is fundamentally important to you. So not only do you have a set of assets that effectively photographically, texturally tell your story, you have an open flexibility to tell multiple stories. You have guidance about photography and how that should look moving forward. And you also are explained how the different ways in terms of the logo can work, and to practical things, to the white visual identity, to your typeface, how it functions. So I guess one of your first products is your story. And this is a strategic storybook. And that storybook's purpose is simply for behind the scenes, for stakeholders, and to remind those stakeholders of what you've got and how you can apply those fantastic assets that you have. And effectively, it's simply bringing together all the aspects, your words, your assets, and putting it in one place as a method of moving forward, and strategically as a reminder and a celebration of not only what Staffordshire has, but how it should think about applying those strategic themes and applications. As I say, this speaks for itself, and it's something that you should engage with and connect with in your own time. I don't need to go through page by page and read each aspect of that. It's a case of reminding you it's there, and your national assets are there to be celebrated. And how do you use those? Do you apply this as part of a mechanism as individual stakeholders to help recruit? Does showing these assets and showing what the place has to offer help in terms of making young people stay in the place? Is it something that will attract students to your university? Because why wouldn't they want to come here? You know, in terms of livability and opportunity. And in terms of, you know, celebrating some of that local talent and some of those individual stories that exist in the place. So that brings us back to the themes and the big idea, and how we should all think about applying these and what these should do to us in terms of changing the way that we think and the way that we behave. Because simply all we're doing is taking the evidence that's been funneled into these words and now thinking about reapplying that out. So with that in mind, we're going to stop for a staff comfort break. And what we hope that you'll do is go away for 5 minutes, have a think, write some things down, think, how does this relate to my business? What can I do? What assets can I use? Or what behavior can I change? What products can I make? So please keep that in mind when you effectively go for your quick comfort break.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So we'll look to reassemble in 5 minutes. So if you can use the Q&A facility for any questions you've got in terms of the points Peter was making at the end there. So we'll come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so we've got quite a number of questions. So I think perhaps we'll make a start on that, conscious of time. So maybe I've got a couple here that I'll throw at you, Christian, to start with. So a question about which organisations are on board with all this, and the examples with that were like Stoke City Council, Port Vale Football Club, etc., etc.
Sure. In terms of the organisations on board, so as I said, this work was initially commissioned by a group of organisations, including the two universities, Keele and Staffordshire, the Local Enterprise Partnership, the County Council, and reps from the other district and borough councils. As we've gone on with the project, Thinking Place over the summer spoke to a huge range of businesses and other organisations. And probably to give you an indication in terms of our place board that I mentioned, some of the businesses represented on that include JCB, Molson Coors, Drayton Manor and Alton Towers. And a huge range of other businesses are already offering their support. But we are very much at the start of this process, at the start of engaging with businesses and organisations to come on board. So we expect that to grow very much over time.
Okay, I'll take one here about why is there such a focus on future ceramics when there's a whole lot of other things going on. I think all that's happened is because we're dealing with this quickly, we haven't mentioned everything. So I think you'll find in the story that there's everything from health to gaming, IT, a focus on manufacturing with JLR, JCB and etc. So we're certainly not just looking narrowly at the ceramics agenda. So Peter, one here. Will the brand change over time, or is this it?
I think I guess the important and the particularly useful thing about Staffordshire brand is it has a set of photographic textural assets that go with your key form, which effectively can be used to express its story as it is, but it also has a window system. And what I mean by that, it's got a cutout system, which effectively means that you can tell individual stories, whether they be heritage, whether they be sport, whether they be for inward investment or for education. So it is a flexible system, which by its very nature will never grow old. So by its nature will always evolve, because it will allow the individual needs and those individual stories of different businesses to be effectively placed in a mechanism that reminds the wider audience that this place should be a centered national place of pride.
Okay. So people asking about the ambassadors program. If you go on We Are Staffordshire on Twitter, you'll see all of the different routes to make sure you get on that ambassador program and don't miss out. Christian, how can people get hold of all the tools that Pete has been talking about?
So following on from the event this morning, I'll be sending out an email with details of where all of the assets are stored. We can share via a Google Drive. I'll also have a hard copy of our storybook available to post out to people as well, so you can see that. And as John's just mentioned, we've got a website in development, wearestaffordshire.co.uk. Which in time will be the repository for all of our resources, where you'll be able to go on and find out all the latest things that are happening and access all of the imagery and photography as well. So we'll make sure that's really easy for you all to get hold of.
Great. And just to say, to reiterate, that photography is available free for you all to use, in terms of what you're doing, so it can help you as well as communicate the place. Peter, how's this going to work with existing brands that are already there, especially in the different towns across the county?
Well, like I was saying earlier, in terms of individual businesses, the point of having a visual language is you don't have to apply the logo at all. You can simply apply your town logo and as an additional element, use the visual language. You know, that's in effectively what's been thought about with place at its focus and at its heart. And also, you know, you're going to have a color palette, you're going to have a set of assets in terms of photography, and it's picking out the ones that are relevant to you.
Okay. Somebody asked a question about youth and diversity in the photography. I think the bit that's fair to say is you've only seen a small selection of the photography, so that is there, and obviously we totally recognise that we need to be reflecting the whole of Staffordshire within this, and we will do. Peter, how do you see this working with employer brands in terms of adding value to the employer?
I think that, you know, going all the way back to my example of Hull and that very simple act of saying, hey, school kids, do you know what's special about your place? Do you know what works with your place? And I think that as a very simple starting point, the photography that you've got here applied to your website as a Staffordshire story is only going to be a positive. You're going to look and you're going to go, really, is this my place? Yeah. And that the people who are local will probably be reminded of the fantastic assets that are there, but it also can reach out to the people who are maybe not local, who might be thinking, should I go for a job application or not? So it's incredibly powerful. And I think one of the other things that's incredibly powerful is by coming together as a county, you know, there are so many layers of positivity about that, and showing that pride in terms of a place and a business and a pride and a connection to place is a massive positive, both in terms of staff retention and recruitment.
Christian, a point about visitors. So I think how will the brand and all of this help keep them? Because obviously we've got a lot of attractions in Staffordshire, but it's also really, really easy to get out of the place.
I think in a couple of different ways. I think, firstly, you know, a lot of this work is around building a greater sense of pride in place and a greater knowledge and awareness of what's on our doorsteps, and allowing particularly organisations where you look in the kind of visitor economy to better connect and cross-promote what they're doing, so that people aren't coming into Staffordshire to visit one attraction. They come to Staffordshire and aware that there's a number of different places for them to go, you know, to fulfill a number of different kind of needs, whether that's a theme park or nature or something else entirely. So I think that greater kind of awareness of Staffordshire as a whole and all of its assets is something we really want to achieve, and I think something that the brand will help us to promote.
Yeah, agree. I think having spent time there, the joining up as opposed to the pinpricks of light is going to be a real opportunity. Peter, you've upset somebody in Tamworth now because you've not shown any images of Tamworth. Did you go there for the photography? And are we recognising that there's a lot of attractions there that are part of the offer?
There's a huge amounts of attractions in Tamworth, and it certainly was one of the things that informed one of the strategic themes in terms of its kind of what it offers, which is fantastic. I think that is literally a case of the photography is going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And, you know, yes, please to that, because it's one of your most useful assets.
And Peter as well, in terms of this, it's great having the brand, and I think the view being expressed is that it's powerful, but will it actually stifle creativity in that people are being asked to follow this?
I think that's a great question, and that's a question that I'm often asked by different creative agencies, because I know as a creative myself the thing that I hate the most is somebody else's toolkit, somebody else saying, think like this. I think as a creative, it's about how you interpret and bring to life. So if you looked at Southlands National Park, for example, for some of the signage, we created very sculptural signage, which effectively was a very soft nod to the visual language, whereas in other occasions, that is very heavily weighted. I think you always have to go back to the strategic story. And as a creative or as an agency, you should think that is a powerful piece of research that will help inform what I express in terms of whether that be a bench, whether that be lighting, whether that be a product, whether that be a communication. It's effectively going, well, actually, I'm going to use the background thinking. Somebody's done all this background thinking for me, which is actually the major stakeholders of the place themselves. So I can believe what they've said because they're from the place. So how do I use those themes and how do I express those themes in different ways? Because I'm sure the place as a whole would be pretty flexible about that in terms of how you express it. What's important here is not just doing things for a random reason, not just willy-nilly choosing blue because you like the color blue, or choosing a logo because you like a logo and it doesn't really mean anything. What's important is connecting expression to meaning as much as you can.
Okay, that's great. Christian, what sort of ideas are there, if any, about getting schools on board, residents on board, ambassadors program, great start, but view being expressed that you'll have to do more than that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of, we are right at the start of the process with this. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we've got a new place brand manager starting with us in a couple of weeks. She's going to be responsible for developing a marketing plan over the next 3 years. It's really important that plan focuses on what our audiences and objectives are. But over time that will grow and develop, and I think with opportunities like, I note this question's come from a colleague at Enjoy Staffordshire. I think with the opportunities like Staffordshire Day, that's one of the avenues where we can start to marry up the new place brand with other activity that's recognised in Staffordshire and appeals to, for example, schools and a resident audience as well, and where we can start to expand this brand and story to a wider range of audiences. So I suppose the short answer is we will be developing our plans in detail over the coming months and looking at a huge range of audiences that we want to target.
Okay, Peter, what was your thinking behind the colour palette?
The colour palette simply comes from the place. It comes from the assets of the place. So your photographic textures that were developed, which have informed the colour palette, came from the different assets of the place.
Okay. Christian, a comment that Stoke has a very distinct identity, yet the council doesn't always position itself as part of Staffordshire. How can that be used with this work as an opportunity rather than just an obstacle?
Well, I think Stoke is a big part of Staffordshire's identity. Always has been and always will be. And interestingly, I think as this project has gone on, we've got a number of individuals and organisations based in the city who are very keen to be part of this. And indeed, the new place board that I mentioned is going to be chaired by the director of a company in Stoke. So I think it's part of Staffordshire story, and part of what we have to offer is the city that we have here in the county, its distinct identity, and we focus on that. John, I know you've got some experience of both places as well. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I think that at the end of the day, both need to help each other. It should be mutually useful. Staffordshire, when you look at the Staffordshire story, heavily influenced by Stoke and its assets. and as you say, will always be communicated, and you'd hope that for Stoke would see the benefit of using the assets of Staffordshire to help promote itself. It's an absolute win-win, I think, for everybody. So I'm just conscious of everybody's time, and we want to stick to time. So I think we've worked our way through all the questions I think that we've got, or we've answered people individually as we've gone along. So at that point, I'll hand over to Christian to wrap it all up.
Thank you, John, and thank you all again for attending this morning. As I mentioned earlier, what we're going to do to follow up on the webinar this morning is I'm going to send you through details of all of the assets, how you can access those, as well as a copy of our storybook too. To plug again, we've got that first ambassador event on the 9th of February. With presentations from a couple of major companies in the county, including Cobra Biologics, who are involved in the manufacture of the COVID vaccine. So that'd be hugely interesting, as well as Engie, who are developing the former Rugeley Power Station site. So I hope to see as many of you there. And we have another of these webinars taking place on the 11th of February for any colleagues of yours who weren't able to attend this morning. So again, if you'd like to plug that to those, although I'll also be sharing a video of the webinar this morning so that you can refer back to that at your own leisure. But otherwise, if there's anything else you need, always come back to me in response to that email I'm going to send out. And look forward to working with you as we get this really important work and Staffordshire story out over the coming months. So thank you very much.